Hello and welcome everybody to NPR. This is All Trek Considered. We're going to speak in low, dulcet tones and murmur to each other about high philosophy. No, we're going to say shit and fuck a lot in this podcast. That's how we roll here, and we're probably going to insult something you love. Because this is V'ger Please, a hateful voyage through the Delta Quadrant. My name is Joseph.
I'm Peter.
How you doing this week, Peter?
Good. Is it a hateful voyage or a hateful trek?
It's a hateful voyage. You know, this is Voyager focused. We gotta keep it on branding here, my friend. We've got
Yeah. I mean, there's no wrong way to go. We've really positioned ourselves well to just use any sort of traveling.
Well, we haven't really even been that hateful.
Sir, you driving? No, I was trekking.
Oh, sovereign Trekkie. You're a sovereign Trekkie. Okay.
Yeah, a warm hello to any of our sovereign citizens out there in the audience today.
I mean, we haven't even really been that hateful. I mean, off and on. Like we talked about Space Ghost Chakotay. We stayed pretty positive on the episode until the last 8 minutes. Basically, soiled itself in diarrhea. But the rest of it, we were liking it.
It's good. Well, Space Chakotay, Space Ghost Astral Projection Chakotay, that was 2 episodes ago. Now that we're building up this buffer underneath us again.
Oh yeah. I keep forgetting. Like, I'm thinking of the episode I just listened to, which is the one we just put out. But we've recorded one since then that I haven't edited yet, and it's just discontinuity as people listen to this. They're like, why are they talking about something I listened to 2 weeks ago? That's the magic of the internet, my friend. Time travel. And we know how Voyager handles that.
There's been a lot of time travel, both on Voyager and our own show. We're well versed in the temporal mechanics.
I want to. I know we did this last week, but I just once again express my appreciation for the lovely theme song that Ian and Sarah created for us. Nothing quite like that perfectly shitty recorder music on purpose that they had to try to make shitty for us, to really make sure the listener knows what they're getting themselves into. Speaking of shitty recorder music, though, how are your musical efforts going?
Not well. I believe it or not, it's hard to learn how to play the recorder poorly when you're changing diapers and holding down that dad life. And other things, Witcher 3. Been eating up a lot of my time. But it'll happen. And when it does, I don't think any of us will be any better for the wear.
The point is to punish everyone that's been foolish enough to waste perhaps up to, at this point, like 13 or 14 hours listening to us talk about Star Trek. They need a reminder that they could be doing something better with their time, and nothing quite like you bleeding like a dying goat over a musical instrument intended for second graders. That's really going to be delivering that message home in peak
Tell
form.
you what, when we finally cut that tape, I'll make sure I'm wearing a Marvel's Punisher t-shirt and really drive the point home.
There we go. That's synergy.
Speaking of driving the point home.
Yeah. The most subtle, opaque episode of Star Trek ever. We have now watched season 1, episode, what is it, 13? 14. And season 1, episode 14, Jetrel. Let's just start talking about it and let our feelings sort of unveil themselves as we go along. Keep the listener in some suspense.
Will do. I like it.
All right. So we start with everyone's favorite dank sex den, courtesy of Tom Paris. His French fuck palace that he built out of force fields and light particles. And they're playing pool, a wholesome 24th century adventure. And it's Neelix versus Tuvok, which seems unfair to put anyone up against Tuvok in a game that requires geometry. They're going for it.
You also have reoccurring holodeck characters here. The tall, skeevy guy with the trilby.
Oh, yeah. The quote-unquote pool shark that speaks in nothing but 20th century vernacular, so he's obviously just an invention. Like, the other people are supposed to be based off of real people that Tom Paris evidently effed when he was in France. But this guy's clearly from, like, central casting of basic cable TV circa 1993 when you need shady-looking mobster character.
So you've got Neelix squaring off with Tuvok, and Tuvok running his mouth and Neelix talking some shit too. This little cold open culminates here with Tuvok screwing up a shot. Felt good. I enjoyed it. I was really expecting him to sink that ball in and rub people's face in it. And not only does he screw the shot, but he proceeds to start making excuses and saying that the ship is wobbly and this and that, which I deeply enjoyed watching him get his face rubbed in some poop.
It's the holodeck character that says, "Oh yeah, I guess Tom should have told you that the table rolls a little to the east, so it's like imperfectly programmed." I would presume to be true to life, or just add character to it, or whatever. And Tom Paris just has this kind of shit-eating grin on his face that he also enjoyed Tuvok's nose being in some poop.
Do you notice that? And it's really Tuvok leading the charge here, that Vulcans always seem to verbalize their logic like anyone else in the room could possibly give a shit about what their inner dialogue is.
Well, I mean, that's TV in general, though. You have to have people talk about their inner dialogue a lot, but for Vulcan characters, I imagine that's even more so the case because they can never show emotion. So the other actors, you don't necessarily always have to have them explain what they're thinking. You can have them show what they're feeling by facial expressions. But every Vulcan actor can't do that. So that means when you're writing these characters, they have to be saying what they're feeling or what they're doing. It's the only way you can know.
Let me tell you the better way to do this. Mass Effect, the L Corps. Are you familiar with them?
Oh, yes, of course I am.
Tentative excitement. Welcome to Herod Emporium Human. Relieved. I am grateful for Aria's return. Hidden back room was getting confining. Her patrol liberated me. Curious. You seem familiar.
With biting disdain.
Tremendous sympathy. There. It's going to be okay.
Elcor are like these, they look like, I don't know, elephant people essentially, and they don't really have faces. I don't know. They're just these real stoic aliens, and their voices can't show any sort of inflection. So when they're talking to humans, because humans can't perceive their body language, they preface everything with their true emotion. And I love them. I think they're my favorite race to come out of that franchise, and probably one of the best new races in science fiction in the past.
They are awesome. It's a shame that they're kind of a bit player through most of the games, but they're always a delight when you find them. Mm-hmm. But the whole vocalization of emotions is something BioWare stole from itself, because that was HK-47's whole shtick in Knights of the Old Republic.
True that.
So they reapplied their. It's not really stealing because it was theirs, but they reapplied it in an imaginative way, and I agree with you. I love the L Corps. Anyway,
Tuvok's a poor loser.
Yes, Tuvok's a poor loser, and he's a shitty L Corps, and they get called to the bridge. And they get called to the bridge because someone is asking for Neelix. And it's explained it's a Harkonian shuttle. I'm sorry, not Harkonian. That would be from Dune.
I will have Arrakis back for myself! He who controls the spice controls the universe!
Yeah, that got me too when I was watching it.
How do you pronounce it? Hakonian? It's real close.
Hold on, let me see here.
I kept wanting to say Harkonian every time I watched it, just because
it's not Harkonian, it's Hakonian.
Hakonian.
Haakonian.
Well, the spice doesn't make these guys flow, but whatever they are, they did conquer Snarf Snarf's planet, evidently. When this person that's this Hakonian comes on screen, Neelix is naturally questioning why he wants to talk to him. By the way, apparently the Hakonians, managed to conquer the Talaxians because of their massive old man face. That seems to be their racial trait. It's just real wrinkly. It's got a lot of wrinkle ridges. Another lazy alien design, although not as atrocious as some of the things we've seen. Not a lot of imagination.
I I'm not going to throw too much shit at these guys. It's not the worst Star Trek alien I've ever seen, and it's certainly not even half as bad as most of the stuff Voyager. I'd have to say this is probably top 10% of the races we've seen out of the Delta Quadrant so far, the makeup on these guys.
It's really generic, though. Like, this is generic alien face for Star Trek.
You know what? I'm gonna go with you on the old man face. I think this dude the makeup looks like if Freddy Krueger spent a couple months at a spa and really got patched up and healed up, but there was still some heavy scar tissue on his face. You do that, and you put some... I will say that when he finally beams over, this guy's got the best alien clothing that I think we've seen on the show yet.
Yeah, I agree. He does have really... I mean, it's not... I don't know what it seems appropriate. This seems like to be normal alien clothes. It doesn't look ridiculous. It's not like open shirts, space molesters like the Skeevians or patchwork nightmare, candy corn shit or anything like that. It's just
it's like a vaguely militant researcher. Yeah. And that's what it's supposed to be. So the ship rolls up on Voyager, and you got this Hakonan asking to speak with Neelix. Says, well, who are you? And this guy says, well, my name's Jatrell. And then Neelix promptly flips his shit.
He looks like he's so triggered he's about to post something to his Tumblr blog. I mean, he looks shook.
Yeah.
And it isn't. I mean, right after the credits, they move right to an explanation of who Jatrell is and why Neelix does not like him. And this is where the episode gets its baseball bat out that is going to beat your ass with for the next 40 minutes. So just in case somehow you watched this episode of Star Trek and didn't pick up on it, this is all about the use of atomic weapons in World War II. This episode is an allegory for the idea of what if Robert Oppenheimer met some Japanese person that got blown up by atomic bombs in Nagasaki. That's it. Everything they do in this episode is to establish that parallel. Everything. And the explanation of what the weapon is and what it does, how many people it killed, is all meant to establish that parallel. And they do not stop with it for the whole episode.
Yeah. You just summed up the episode in exactly the light that it should have had. So, setting that to the side for a moment, again, Neelix is on this ship, Kess is on this ship with the intention that they are, field guides to the Delta Quadrant. Janeway continues to be astounded episode after episode at the tidbits of information that Neelix is rolling out there. At what point, when you've got this guy who is your tour guide, you sit him down and say, all right, tell me everything. And I get that Neelix isn't going to be able to cover all of the bases, but certainly you would think at some point he'd be like, oh yeah, then there's this one race called the Hakonan that got in a huge war with my race and enslaved, I don't know if enslaved, but, conquered my fucking homeworld, and here's some other stuff. Yet all, brand new stuff that Janeway had never heard before. Neelix is very not disposable. Neelix is a big liability, right?
Yeah.
He's running off. He's getting his lungs stolen. What other
complains a lot. He tries to bail out when they're going to do something dangerous. He's wandering off on away missions. Like, he shows value. Like, they try and the whole helping you scavenge for food you can eat type of stuff, and where there are people you can trade with and that sort of thing. Like, they try and do a little bit of that and establish that. But you're right. Like, at what point is Janeway hasn't sit this guy down and be like, all right, you need to fucking tell me everything that you know, because I want to stop running into some shit that I don't know about until 5 minutes after it's too late.
Especially with their perching for shooting from the hip. But what I'm saying though is, Neelix stands a pretty good chance of dying every episode. And if he dies, all that information's gone. And, maybe it'd be nice to have that continuity if your tour guide gets his brain stolen or whatever's going to happen the next time they run afoul of the Vidians. Like, bleed this dude for the information, so you got it up front. But yeah, so his Talaxian homeworld got conquered by these Hakonans. They're not on good terms, and basically he'll go on to say that the homeworld surrendered unconditionally after a utopia colony of theirs was super nuked, and all of his family who lived on that colony died either in an instant or a slow radiation-filled death.
I will give all credit to Ethan Phillips in this episode. He has a couple good scenes where he's puts on his serious acting face. So I am critical of the relentless nature of the real world parallel and how much they just keep going back to that well. But the actor they have playing Chitrell, who's actually an old guest actor hand on TNG. You might remember him as that admiral that defected. Jarak in TNG. He also played basically Odo's science dad in DS9. So he's been in Star Trek a few times. And
he also played Alexander Rozhenko in a weird time travel episode where somehow he came back to talk to Worf about something. This guy's name is James Sloyan.
Yes. Yeah.
He is fucking awesome. I very vividly remember the Jarek episode. So real quick, jumping back, this was season 3 episode off Next Gen. What the hell was it called? It was something.
The Defector. I think that's what it's called.
The Defector. He flies out in that sweet looking scout ship. The Romulans are hot on his ass. He comes in saying that he's like a nobody engineer and that he has information that there is a secret base that's being built in the neutral zone and that the Romulans are going to stage a hostile invasion into Federation space. And then he tips his hand and shows that he's really a Romulan admiral and he's all about trying to keep this peace. I like this guy. He kicked ass in that Next Gen episode. I never caught him as the Deep Space Nine scientist, but that was a reoccurring character in DS9, I believe. And despite whatever else we're going to say about this episode, this guy hits a home run, I think, for his portrayal of the character and his participation in the scenes for this Voyager episode.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm going to kind of lightly go through some of. I don't feel like we would do a disservice to go blow by blow through some of these scenes, but he's amazing, and Ethan Phillips does a good job in the scenes that he's in with him. It's one of those situations where, you know, like if you're playing around people, how Patrick Stewart used to really lift the performances of everyone around him on TNG. When you're playing against someone who's good, you get better. And so there's a real strength in those scenes, but it's not the acting that I have a problem with in this episode. As we go through, we find out about, you know, Neelix has a lot of PTSD because he went to the colony after it got super nuked. And the reason why this guy who invented the super nuke is here is because as a consequence of being part of the sort of the rescue team / emergency party that Snarf Snarf was exposed to, you know, space radiation and has blood cancer, essentially.
Yeah.
And Chichel is trying to cure that blood cancer. I think the strongest part of the episode comes in kind of the personal problem Neelix has with even helping him with that, because of how deeply he's been affected by, obviously, the murder of his entire family, of so many of the people that, you know, hundreds of thousands of his people, as well as the decay of the survivors and the state that they were in when they found them. To the massive credit of the actor, the scene where he has this standoff with Chitrell in sickbay and is talking about what that was like is deeply powerful. And that stuff is good. The problem is that's not the whole episode.
Yeah, the majority of the hesitation on Neelix's behalf comes out while he's in the mess hall, and you've got Kess and Janeway double teaming him, you know, just trying to convince him to participate in this research study that Chitrell's like, look, I need to screen you and see if you have blood cancer, and if you do, you know, the information I can glean off of you is going to help efforts to, you know, clean this stuff up. This scene establish three things. One, Neelix doesn't wear gloves when he's preparing food for the crew.
Which if he has, like space blood cancer,
Might be an issue.
That's the problem.
2, Neelix is actively licking his hands while he's preparing food for the crew. Right in front of the captain, too. Like, the dude's, like, straight up licking his hands and then going back in there. I'd be like, listen, you filthy space cat. Knock it the fuck off.
Also, did you notice that Janeway just has no personal space?
Oh, my God. That is my next note. Is both boobs super glued onto Neelix's elbow while she's talking. Like, she's, like, right up. Like, it looks like she's trying to start a fight. Like, I can't past being right on top of him, but they pin him, and she is, like, full flush, trying to, like, vicissitude herself into Neelix. It is ridiculous. They got the whole mess hall to run this scene, and like they film it in the smallest corner possible.
They really box Kess and Janeway in right up next to him, and it's bizarre because it seems so unnatural. Like, why would you talk this close to him? Like, what do you? I understand that I mean, I guess it's worth pointing out at this point that most of the core crew. You barely see them in this episode. There's zero Harry Kim. There's minimal Paris. There's one scene with Torres. There's
a little bit of Doctor.
A tiny bit of Doctor. There's an even smaller amount of Chakotay. This is really Janeway, Kess, Neelix, and Jetrel. Those are the characters you see in this episode. And I get that Janeway and Kess, because they have different kind of levels of affection for Neelix. One is, a lover, a child bride, if you will, and the other is, the captain as well as the sort of, awkward mother figure of the ship, and they are concerned about his well-being, and so they are attempting to convince him to do this from those perspectives. I get that's supposed to be the dynamic. It just comes off as very weird. Especially when you shoot him like that.
Yeah. So anyways, my third thing that you learned from this scene was, in fact, that Janeway is a close talker. It's ridiculous.
They have the good scene where they have this kind of face-off in the briefing room. It's real dark. It's darkly lit. It's like all the lights are turned down for this. And it looks like an episode of like Crossfire, like old school Crossfire.
Well, all the botched attempts to try and get more energy, which of course always result in losing even more energy, has probably caused them to start rationing how many lights can be on per room at this point.
And that's where Jetrel starts to take the very specifically 20th century Oppenheimer position about what has happened, straight up using some of the same arguments that were made by the people that created the atomic bomb in regards to its...
According to the show notes, he even uses a few actual direct quotes from him. Before we jump into Jetrel and his version of things, Neelix has laid on the table that his species has been conquered by this presumably aggressive race. They never really say...
what they were fighting over. Yeah, they never mention it.
The war. Later on... Neelix will say that he had objections to the war and that he didn't think it was a just war. So I don't know, maybe the Talaxians...
That's where the episode really falls apart. When we get there, I will explain my searing hot take of hatred.
But anyways, you've got the Federation, which is a technologically advanced civilization. They have very clearly condemned use of... weapons of mass destruction. They have sympathy for Neelix. Really the deck should be stacked against the Hakonnen and Jetrel in specific, yet you don't really get any protective sympathy. Like, you get sympathy, but there's not really any anger or defensiveness out of Voyager and the crew about, maybe we don't want this crazed mad scientist walking around our treasure box.
No pushback. None.
They're just like, hey, let this guy come on over. He can't be that bad.
Yeah.
right?
I think you were about to say our treasure box of technology. Was that about to be your quote?
Pandora's box. And in fact, when they do finally con Neelix into agreeing to it, and they bring Jetrel over, there's a red herring that I bit onto, and it kind of pans out a little bit towards the end. But like some of the first words out of Jetrel's mouth to Janeway is, I've heard all about your transporter, and it's even more amazing than what I possibly could have imagined. Like right there's like red flags. Like, is this guy just here scouting our tech? Is he going to pull, the same shit we just did to the Skeevians and try to like reverse engineer our shit? Or, is this the build up to some sort of advanced scouting and the Harkonnen are going to try and come and either take the ship or boost technology off of us?
I never got the feeling that this story seems so focused that, I mean, there's no B plot. It's just another episode where it's solely focused on the A plot, which is, I think, to its benefit, that they were going to go quite that route. They do quickly kind of pay off some of that transporter interest, though. So they do finally scan Snarf Snarf for blood cancer, and he's got it, according to Jetrel. He has a reflective conversation with Kes that was super awkward about how he's like relieved that he's going to die before her now. It was so strange.
I like that scene.
You did? I was so weird to me.
Well, there's one good thing that will come from all this. When I first met you, I didn't know that your species only lived 8 or 9 years. I fell in love with you without knowing how lonely it would be to live without you after you're gone. Now that I'm going to die first, I don't have to worry about it.
Like, really? This is what you're going to harp on? Like, oh, I was so sad I was going to die before you, but now I'm going to die after you. Now I'm going to die before you, so it's okay now.
Well, two things. One, that, Neelix is in love with Kes, and I would say that would certainly weigh heavy if you you pledge yourself to someone and find out, oh yeah, I'm going to die in 2 years. So if you're someone like Neelix, who's a high morale kind of guy, you're going to try and find the silver lining there, and that's a good way to kind of lay her at ease. And the other option is that he could become all consumed by dread that he is going to die a painful blood cancer death. And then we could have a repeat of him moping around sickbay like he did in the episode where he got in Phage. And we get another shitty patient Neelix episode, which I certainly did not want. So I'll take the hand wave. Everything's cool. Don't worry about it.
When we talked about the Phage episode, we ignored 15 to 20 minutes of the screen time because that shit was so terrible. And we still talked about it for an hour.
Yeah. Kes in this whole thing, and let's take a step back. Kes as a character, she doesn't really piss me off. Like, I thought I was going to harbor some pretty deep resentment of her, and maybe things will change in season 2. But I got to say, 90% of what I've seen out of her in season 1, like, she's a real, I don't know, in touch with your emotions, let's talk about it, squishy character. And it doesn't bother me. The actor holds down the fort, presents the material, and she does so in a way that doesn't really turn stomachs.
I think they do a great job of using her, particularly how they pair her with the Doctor.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think Kes has been a real strong part of the show. I think she's obviously a bit of a Mary Sue with all of her like tremendous mental ability and that sort of thing. But this is Star Trek. You get a lot of that, Yeah. I mean, I'm used to that, so it doesn't bother me.
I think what it is she acts with conviction.
She acts with that sort of conviction that comes with being kind of naive.
Yeah.
Which is fitting with her character. She literally was born yesterday. That was the whole concept. Be an alien that was born yesterday.
But I mean, the actress delivers lines with convictions that, I think she gets in the headspace correctly. And
it's true. But now she has been convicted. Oh! Oh my God! I nailed it. I'd ask for a high five right now if you were here. Would you give it to me?
Well.
Would you give that to me?
Yeah, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh.
All right,
That's
thank you. I appreciate it.
But anyway, so Kess coming in with the touchy feelings, doing so to the credit of the show, and it's something I think we're going to circle back around. Like, everybody has really solid performances in this episode. It's just, I don't know, it's a shallow episode.
This episode is horribly failed by its writers, and not by its actors. Its actors did a great job. It's almost the reverse of what we've seen in the past. I have no complaints about any of the performances. I have a huge gripe I'm going to get to about the writing.
So Jetrel also, I appreciate the direction that they bring the character in, because you're trying to establish motivation for this guy, and he flat out states, like, I feel bad about what happened, but I have remorse, but I don't have regret.
I do not regret it. I did what had to be done.
Really? It was necessary to vaporize more than 250,000 people and to leave thousands of others to be eaten away by Metreon poisoning?
Would it make any difference if I told you we never thought there would be any radiation poisoning? That anyone close enough to be exposed would be killed by the initial blast? It was unfortunate we were wrong.
Unfortunate?
He takes on, from the beginning, the position that Oppenheimer also took in regards to, well, he never wanted, hundreds of thousands of people to die from his invention, but his point is, if he didn't invent it, someone else was going to. I mean, there was no way to stop the progress that was happening. And, part of what they were uncovering was how, the universe worked. And it's the quote I think that I liked that they used was, it's good to know how the universe works. That's part of what scientists do. And, ultimately it's the military that made this decision, and nothing I was going to say was going to get them to stop from doing it once they became dedicated to using this as a weapon. And the position he takes is not necessarily one of like personal anguished regret. It's more of miffed that his scientific legacy is going to be one of that everyone thinks he's a monster when that isn't what his motivation was. He speaks about how his family left him, and that they took the kids, and he's since then gone on this quest to use his scientific principles to try and undo some of the damage that his invention has done.
So let's show where the character diverts off Oppenheimer, and I'm gonna peel back some of the later developments that would come towards the end of the episode. Jetrel's establishing, like, I'm not pursuing research into saving Talaxians out of guilt so much as continued science. And later in the episode, it comes to light that he actually has this blood plague himself because of his, I don't know if it was his work developing it or if he actually visited the planet and spent extended amounts of time and picked this up. But he's sick. He's got a very short amount of time to live. I think this guy really does feel guilty as hell.
It's revealed by the end. Like, this is an act. Like, he really does feel guilty.
And this pursuit of guilt has basically ruined his life. His involvement in this Talaxian colony, trying to basically undo his work, has had him branded a what the hell is
a sympathizer, a Talaxian sympathizer, yeah,
a Talaxian sympathizer. So his wife and kids think that he's a monster for developing a weapon of mass destruction. The government and the people have condemned him to be a sympathizer and basically shunned him out. So this guy is all alone, and for the fruits of his labors, he's been rewarded with a blood cancer. Towards the end, you'll see the guy's really desperately unhinged. But before we get that far,
the plot continues in that Jetrel wants to use Voyager's transporter system in order to beam isotopes from the cloud that's around the colony. And he sells this to Janeway with the intention of curing Snarf Snarf's blood cancer if he can do this. And Janeway's 100% for it, doesn't question his motives, even when he almost passes out in her office. And they roll there to do this.
Along the way, you've got Neelix letting out some of his dark history, too.
This is what I started to hate the episode a little bit. I guess I didn't hate it overall, but this is where I really went from, oh, wow, this is...
Things fall apart.
Yeah. So this whole parallel that they've just decided to go whole hog on, what they fucked up is explaining the context of the conflict. They're obviously comparing this to the use of atomic weapons in World War II, and there's a very specific context as to the ongoing and forever debate if it was justified or not, based on what was happening within that conflict. They never give you any of that context of what this conflict was like between these two people, right? So you're left with unanswered questions as to what they were fighting over and if the use of this weapon could in any way, shape, or form have been justified or not. I guess the assumption you're supposed to make is that it just simply wasn't. And to give Neelix additional conflict in the episode or some sense of having wronged or done something incorrectly, they saddle him with this backstory that he was essentially a deserter. He was AWOL from the general draft of Talaxians to fight the Harkonnens. And he says it was for philosophical reasons, but you don't know what they were. And then he cops to the fact that he was just a coward, as if this somehow makes him in any way culpable for what Jetrel or the Hakonians did in destroying his home and killing his family. And it just made no fucking sense.
And they even have this scene where Kess is playing Chip's counselor with him, Neelix is having sweaty nightmares, and he lays it out, on the table that I had shirked my draft. I was hiding. I told myself that, like you said, it was I was a objector to the reasons of the war. And then Kess is like, oh, so maybe you're mad at Jetrel because you're mad at yourself. She starts trying to draw these illusions. He's like, yes, that's absolutely it. I'm like, nothing anybody just said made any sense, and he's agreeing to it. Like,
no, you should be mad at Jetrel because he killed 400,000 people and murdered your family. That's good enough. We don't need any kind of psychological nuance to that. But I mean, even if they wanted to go the other route and explain maybe the Talaxians were doing some bad shit and everyone was dirty and war is terrible, if they wanted to go down that road, they could have. But this is so stupid. Why are you giving Neelix this undercurrent that somehow, some way, has personal ownership responsibility or shouldn't be mad at this guy? No, he's okay. He should be mad at this guy. This guy is someone to be mad at. This is all right.
So a real awkward scene there. They end up in the colony, which is way the other direction from home. And they start using the transporter, and you get a rehash of any other time that Voyager decides to beam shit from outside 4 feet away from the super explosive. Captain, I'm a rando war criminal who was responsible for the most heinous acts of scientific atrocity ever. Could you do me a favor and beam some poison fucking gas into your super nerve center? It'll be cool. I promise.
I saw this and all I could think of is Peter's going to be so fucking turned over the fact that they're beaming shit in right next to the fucking warp core again.
Not shit. It's not even hey, here's some rando proto-molecules or whatever from the holodeck episode. It's this is poison gas. And if you have, the confinement beam wasn't tight enough and this thing's not going to fly off and go haunt the holodeck, it's going to give everybody in your engineering section blood cancer. Do this in a cargo bay. Just...
Jetrel asked B'Elanna, are you sure you want to do this way? And she's like, no, we do this all the time. It works great. We're pros. Fuck you, you're pros.
It works 75% of the time. It's cool.
A couple episodes ago, you're fucking this up cost the souls of 3 of your crewmates. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So they do another, ridiculous beaming of space poison, and off Jetrel goes to start experimenting on it in sickbay. And the doctor rolls up on him and starts, asking to help and this and that. And Jetrell, who had witnessed in an earlier scene how to turn the doctor off, turns the doctor off. And they start playing the Something is Sinister music. That maybe Jetrell is not there for the honest intentions that he has laid out initially.
And Snarf Snarf shows up, sees some weird Cronenberg shit in the capsule that Jetrell's been experimenting on.
So this shit in the capsule, it looks like a living booger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like one of those, like when you're in a real dry climate and there's like some blood in there and it gets kind of crusty, but it's still gooey.
Yeah, all right.
Way up in the back, yeah.
I was going to go with like tree sap, but sure. Okay.
Well, it's definitely more crusty booger, and it's pulsing. Neelix rolls into sickbay because he's just had this enlightening, soul-relieving conversation with Kess where she basically laid out the most cockamamie line of reasoning ever, and he jumped on. But, the TLDR there is that Neelix is going to go basically tell this Jetrell guy that he's not as mad as he had made it to be earlier. He walks up behind Jetrell, sees this pulsing booger, and is like, "What are you doing?" And Jetrell turns around, like jumps, startled, like jumps a foot in the air, is like, "Oh gosh, you startled me." Neelix gets a little closer, and the scientists who've been poring over the space booger, like, puts him in a headlock and pops him with a hypo spray that he was just happened to be holding, full of some knockout juice. And knocks Snarf Snarf down. So I'm led to believe now that this doctor just always has basically a chloroform.
He's ready. He's ready to hit the club. Just in case he runs into some ladies who need a little persuading.
I'm going to tell you who this guy needs to run into. Him and that Kmart Klingon with the poison
toxin. Yeah, boom.
These are the two most dangerous men of the Delta Quadrant. You do not want Jetrell or Rando Sub-Lieutenant at your party, or there will be problems.
Yes, their faces are above the bar. They got these guys clocked cold. The bouncers are taking them the fuck out. They've had problems. The party reconvenes in Transporter because that's where Jetrell ends up going, and this is where it all gets played out. What Jetrell is up to is he's not trying to cure the blood cancer.
Before you even get into that, Janeway goes for a status report. She doesn't get Jetrell. And then she turns the doctor back on. The doctor's like, yeah, Jetrell turned me off. And oh, look, here's Neelix probably dead on the ground. And they're like, oh, gosh, there might be a problem. So they send a security team down and Janeway goes with them. And they confront Jetrell in the transporter room at phaser point. And I don't even know if phaser's even out at this point. But Janeway's line is like, you're beginning to lose credibility. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, you just found Snarf Snarf knocked the fuck out on the ground from the mass murder who's beaming poison onto your ship. Like, Janeway, I think we're a little past losing credibility here.
The scheme that Jetrell has worked out is that everyone that was killed by the super nuke was essentially deaminatized. They were just disintegrated, but all of their molecules are still floating around. And what Jetrell wants to do, I thought this was actually a coherent idea in terms of how the technology works, is he wants to use the transporter to gather the molecules of someone he's identified using DNA records and essentially reconstitute them by putting their shit back together using the transporter technology. And that kind of makes sense. Like, well, that's what the transporter does. It takes molecules, disassembles them, and then reassembles them someplace else. So if there's a bunch of disassembled molecules floating around and we know what ones we're looking for, we can just get them, put them in the transporter beam, and rematerialize them.
Basically, it is Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen.
Yes.
That whatever this nuke was, we're not dealing with a real nuke. It was something that happened with such quick intensity that all of these people were disassembled, and just like Dr. Manhattan, you can just put them all back together, presumably not glowing blue, presumably not with dongs out.
That's true. And Of course, Jetrell mentions that, Snarf Snarf never really had blood cancer. This was all a ruse because somehow he knew that Janeway was an accomplished scientist, so she would buy into a scientific reason why he was there. So I guess that's just some shit that got out about Janeway. He ultimately impresses upon them the wanting to try and do this because he is now being forthright in that he is sorry about what happened, and there's nothing he can do except to try and make it right. And this is his one shot at making it work before he dies. So please, pretty please, with sugar on top, will you please try and do this?
This is where everything really fell. I don't know. This is where my biggest grievances in the episode go. This guy has the most purest of intentions, right? This isn't something as narrow in scope as I want to cure some 100-odd people who have, I don't know, maybe a couple thousand people who have blood cancer. I have a way potentially to undo the weapon of mass destruction that I destroyed an entire planet with. Now, they present this guy in a light that he is essentially crazy and that there's no way in hell this is going to work, and that this is someone who is so guilt-riddled that they are attempting to hang on to even the most thinnest threads of hope. But, he comes on to Voyager, again, with the intention of saving an entire planet. And instead of just going, hey, you guys have a real good reputation. And now that I've got you Neelix alone in a room, what if I told you I could undo all of the death, that whole story you told me about your family being vaporized and all this bad stuff. We can undo all of this with this amazing Federation technology. Please, let's put this entire ship's worth of assets behind my plan and make it work. Instead, the guy's basically trying to hijack the fucking ship and create as much ill will as possible until he's finally cornered and has to, roll out the plan.
There was no reason for him to lie. None. You just said it all. He could have just come up he could have just been 100% honest with his plan from the beginning. And there was zero reason for him to invent this cover story.
Yeah, he could have been like, hey, as it turns out, I know the most about this weapon of mass destruction that killed everybody because, I designed it, and it just so happens I have a really good way to maybe undo all that. So what's even more hard to swallow than that is the hesitation that Tuvok and Janeway have in refusing to even try up front. It takes like Neelix groveling and this other guy like Jetrell literally on his hands and knees like, please just try. And they put the most half-ass effort into indulging this guy possible. They give him all of 30 seconds worth of cooperation. And they start beaming this stuff off the planet and trying to reconstitute some DNA. And it doesn't work. They're 15 seconds of effort. The guy fizzles and they're like, oh, well, it's just too crazy to work. And it's like, you guys just put minimal effort in and you almost got it.
You can see the guy. He's like seeing his hands, like he's clearly like starting to become coherent, which is horrifying if you think about it. That these people are still like, their molecules are out there. And if we just found a way to reassemble them, they would just be people again. Like, whoa, that's dark. But yeah, he has no reason to lie. And I know that it's just wrap it up, Charlie. Like, okay, we're at the end of the episode. Fucking wrap it up. Like, okay, it doesn't work. We all move on. But it's just handled so poorly that you're just like, why did you lie? Okay. And then like, that almost worked, give it another try.
And that's the problem though. Like you have people who have just pulled the most amazing scientific breakthroughs out of their, and again, let's tie back into the post-scarcity society of the Federation, and nobody's really working on hard stuff because they don't have to, and that's why Voyager accomplishes such great things, is because it's life and death situations. But like, go get the fucking doctor who can bring people back to life from the dead. Go get B'Elanna, who has pulled one amazing accomplishment after another out of her ass. Get more than two people standing around in a transporter room and put some real effort into this, because the guy almost just pulled it off. If you wanted it ultimately to be a flub and just an act of desperation from a crazy old man who's dying a painful death, have nothing happen at all and have it be such a clear failure that it's unavoidable. But if you're Neelix and you see like, Jesus, we almost just did it. Like, could you, take a month out of your drive home? You guys divert for every other little fucking stupid thing. And maybe we could put like 2 weeks into trying to do this thing.
You're precisely right. This is why I say, like, now that we're at the end of the episode, let me reveal my feelings. This is probably the best acted, worst written episode we've seen. And I ended up infuriated by that. Like they wasted amazing performances that they got out of people by having an episode that made so little sense. Everything that kind of the right turn they took with Neelix near the, around the 2/3 point and assigning all this personal guilt that he has over the situation, even though it makes no sense in context to the rest of the episode. And this ending where we have this conflict where this guy lied for no reason and he almost pulled off what he wanted to pull off, and they don't really even try it again. And then they have the button on the episode where he dies and Neil's like, oh, I forgive you. And that's it. There's no resolution of any of the stuff Neelix went through. Like, he doesn't come to terms with anything with what he did aside from having witnessed him, be remorseful. Like, there's no acknowledgement of it in the scene. It's just kind of like, all right, we're done.
In fact, he says, I forgive you. And Jetrel on his deathbed, like, raises his hand and goes to say something. And instead just like dies. And it's like even more reinforcing the episode. It's just like a dry hump and a pointless tease of something that could have been more.
I know, again, you're not a DS9 guy, but I would say among my top 5 favorite episodes of Star Trek, period, is an episode from DS9, I think it's the first season, called Duet. And it's an episode that's all about Kira confronting a Cardassian that she believes is a notorious war criminal. And this feels like a shit version of that episode. Like, they were going for the same kind of feel and beats of this conflict between Neelix and Jetrel as the core, and instead of going whole hog on that personal journey, they just have these diversions that end up making no sense whatsoever. And it's unfortunate because they got grade A guest actor and they got good performances out of everybody that was featured on the show, and then the writing just failed them.
Yeah. I would say, all things considered, at the end, I'll count it as a good episode because it was enjoyable to watch. It just it came off shallow. It was
disappointing.
And,
it had so much potential when it started. It was ham-handed. I mean, it was not subtle at all, but at least it was compelling, very compelling to start.
Yeah.
And then just kind of just like we've had a couple episodes like this. It just fucking shits all over itself. As it goes into its third act, they just don't know how to finish on Voyager. I think the only episode I felt like finished strong was Eye of the Needle. They waited until the end to hit you with the hammer, and that was well paced.
Yeah.
This, it just falls apart, and it just kind of ends. And soon our journey through Voyager will also, like our season 1 Voyager, it's going to end in a similar fashion with our next episode.
And what is that?
We are going to be watching Learning Curve as the next episode. The blurb on that is, while Voyager's mixed Starfleet Maquis crew seems to be working out, a few rogue Maquis are fighting the integration. So
that sounds like a very solid premise for a show that prominently features terrorists mixed in with goody two-shoes.
It's an episode that I recall quite well because I couldn't believe that's where they left the season.
Are we about to hit season?
Yeah, that's
finale,
the season
then?
finale. The next episode is the season finale. First season of Voyager only has 15 episodes.
Wow. Well, 16 if you count the 2-parter, but Well, let's go ahead and close this one out. I'm going to give you the rule of acquisition number 74 in honor of the late Jetrel and his science overall. knowledge equals profit.
It's. I'm all bent out of shape now. I feel like whenever I see something wasted like that, just chaps my.
I did like the Detrell's portrayal of the consummate scientist, and even at the end with all the guilt and everything else, like the dude sticks to his morals, and he really holds up that cold, clinical, scientific facade well. But all right,
Thank you again for joining V'ger Please. This is a Hateful Voyage Through the Delta Quadrant. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter. We are everywhere fine podcasts can be downloaded. We have the V'ger Please Trauma Support Group. Please join. That's where we do a lot of discussion. If you are kind enough, we would love it if you were to like us on Facebook, if you were to share podcast posts, give us a review on iTunes or on Facebook. Anything to help visibility of the cast. We appreciate it because it draws more people in to join in the suffering, and nothing brings people together like shared suffering, my friends. I'm Joseph.
I'm Peter.
And we'll see you for the season finale of Star Trek Voyager next week. Peace.